One of the questions I get a lot is why did I choose the freelancing route as opposed to going full-time when I started out as a software engineer 7 years ago back in 2012. So right away I did freelance. I didn't even consider full-time. I knew right away that I wanted to work for myself. So the initial reasons were pretty much what everyone else would go into freelancing for. You work for yourself, you don't have a boss, set your own schedule, you can work wherever you want to. All those things were true. That's not to say it was easy. It was definitely hard breaking in, but I think it's hard breaking in full-time as well, so just pick one or the other, really. So all of those things turned out to be true. I did end up making my own schedule, working where I want to, working when I want to, taking advantage of my mobility. So in the past year I moved to a new city. All my clients are overseas or in a different part of the country anyway, so it really didn't matter where I was situated. So I decided to take advantage of that and try out a new city. I moved to Washington, D.C. from New York, where I'd spent pretty much my entire life before D.C. So things like that did factor in, and I certainly have taken advantage of it. Looking back though, would I do it again? Absolutely, but I would do it for different reasons. There were unknown benefits to the freelancing life, the freelancing choice that I made, that I didn't realize until now, until after the fact. Chief among them is probably the breadth and the variety of my experience. So at this point I've probably had around 2 or 3 dozen clients in the startup field, including what's called dev shops. And what that's given me is a wide range of perspective, of experiences, that has exposed me to a lot of situations, a lot of stacks, a lot of code bases, a lot of problems, different kinds of people, different kinds of teams, and different ways of doing things. And that has been tremendous in my development. That's probably been the single biggest benefit of working the freelance lifestyle as opposed to working full-time. What tends to happen with full-time engineers in sort of static environments, maybe not so much the Facebooks and the Googles, but let's just say a typical software company or maybe a corporate entity. This is especially true in corporate entities where you have an engineer who gets plugged into a role, and that engineer basically stays in that role for 5, 10, 15 years, which may be good if that role is relevant for that entire period of time, but more often what happens in technology is after a handful of years, let's say 5 years, you find that your department is being folded out because technology has moved on. Whatever you were working on isn't as relevant anymore, and the industry has moved on to a different stack or a different technology or implementation or whatever, and you might find yourself obsolete. And if you haven't been evolving your skill set and letting yourself go stale for 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a full-time role, it is very hard to sort of pick up where the technology has left off. It is very hard to catch up. And so a lot of people struggle with that. Whereas as a freelance contract engineer, I'm basically in a perpetual state of evolution. I'm always learning new things, mostly because I have to. It's not necessarily so much because I want to, but it doesn't hurt that I enjoy learning new things. That's very important. In fact, if you don't enjoy learning new things, you're not going to make it in the software industry, period. It'll just be a tremendous struggle for you in general. So having to learn new things and be exposed to new technologies, and a lot of them were cutting edge technologies, so especially in Silicon Valley, where most of the companies I've worked with are Silicon Valley style companies. They weren't literally in Silicon Valley. Most of them were in New York City. But they were Silicon Valley style. They were startups. And so a lot of them had sort of bleeding edge implementations and technologies and things that I had to quickly get up to speed and learn. For example, that's how I learned React Native. About 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago. I did a React Native contract with a startup based out in Colorado. And although I'd known React and Redux very, very well, I'd never done a React Native stack before. And so I picked up the contract based on just my regular code abilities, and I used that to get very good at React Native. And so that was a benefit to the job, in addition to just being paid and working with professionals and learning new things. So this is something you don't see as much in a full-time role. Again, that's probably not true at the higher levels like Amazon and Google. You probably are exposed to various cutting-edge technologies. I mean, for the most part, they're creating those technologies. But if you're sort of in the field like me, you're just sort of in the wild like I am. It's on you to figure out how to stay relevant. It's up to you to figure out how to stay on top of the trends, which are always moving very fast in technology, as you well know. So I would say that's the biggest benefit to working as a freelance contract engineer as opposed to full-time. There are obviously other benefits, but there are also drawbacks that are probably very well documented. Things like you have to manage your own books, you have to maintain your own finances, you're responsible for tracking your expenses for taxation purposes. You have to file your own taxes, things like that. And probably just keeping the business flow going is definitely a challenge at first. Gets easier, as with most things. It gets easier with the more experience you get, but at first it was definitely a struggle to keep the business flow going. Get new clients, get the whole system down, figure out how to close new clients, how to identify clients, where to find them, things of that sort. So that was always a struggle. One thing that helped me break into that was, prior to my life as a contract engineer, I was also working pretty steadily as a standardized test tutor. I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years, while I taught myself how to program. So talking to clients, submitting invoices, keeping the business flow going, the client flow. I kind of already had a feel for that, which definitely helped going into my software experience. I'll say this much: it was much easier getting clients for standardized test prep than it is for software engineering. That's still true today. But yeah, those things are worth remembering if you're debating which side you want to fall on, freelance or full-time. But everything you hear about freelance is true. You make your own schedule, you can travel, do your own thing. Today, for example, I didn't do any hours because I just didn't feel like it. I was tinkering with this new camera that I got, setting up the lighting, trying to figure out how to get the proper lighting set up and the audio set up. So I spent the day doing that, and I didn't have to answer to anyone. So that's nice. That's pretty fun. But like I said before, I would say the most enjoyable part is learning new things and constantly evolving as an individual, gaining new technologies and getting better and better at your craft, so to speak. And that's very rewarding from a professional standpoint. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you have any questions about which field you want to fall in, full-time or freelance, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll leave it in the comments. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.